Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts Ariana and Seth.
This is the Pop Cult Podcast. I'm Seth.
I'm Ariana.
And today we're going to talk about two different movies that kind of share similar takes on their subjects in that they are really trying not to come down one way or the other about the topic they're addressing. So a little later, we are going to be talking about the dubiously titled The American Society of Magical Negroes. But first, we're going to talk about an indie film that got released a little earlier this year, The Sweet East. A high school senior from South Carolina gets her first glimpse of the wider world, picturesque cities, and woods of the eastern seaboard on a class trip to Washington, D.C. Now, that's the official description, and that is an awful description for this movie. The film is essentially a kind of post-Trump Alice in Wonderland.
Yes.
And it's focused on, and that was one thing, is I really wasn't sure how old she was. I wasn't sure if it was a college trip or a high school trip.
I think it was a high school trip. It just, again, they just were so vague about so many things for you to get to your own conclusion.
So what you need to know about this film is that it is the directorial debut of cinematographer Sean Price Williams, who you'd be familiar with if you've seen any of the Safdie brothers movies. I know he was the cinematographer on Heaven Knows What and Good Time. And he's also been the cinematographer on Alex Ross Perry's movies, who produced The Sweet East. And before we get into talking about this film, I just want to hear Ariana get mad. So I'm going to ask her, we've seen many of Alex Ross Perry's films. I think we went through and watched everything he directed at one point. And those films included The Color Wheel, Listen Up, Philip, Queen of Earth, and then Her Smell. He seems to really love Elizabeth Olsen, because I think Elizabeth Moss. Because wasn't she the girlfriend in Listen Up, Philip too?
Yeah.
So what were your thoughts on Alex Ross Perry's film work?
He's just a white hipster that thinks that he's saying something that's edgy, but it's really just racist at the end of the day. Her Smell, which I expected that I would maybe like a little bit better, was just so lackluster of understanding like the female experience in rock bands. It was like he was doing a dollar store version of Courtney Love.
Well, it felt like something somebody with not a lot of life experience or experience in that particular area would have written.
Yeah.
So like very little research.
Yeah, it was a disservice. And also just as much as I can agree with some people that Elizabeth Moss does like a great performance, I always keep her at an arm's length when it
Scientology thing.
The Scientology thing, she doesn't stand for anything.
So Perry has produced this, and it's a cinematographer.
Yeah.
And I would say I think it's definitely Sean Price Williams' vision for sure. But there are clearly some thematic and concepts that he and Perry share. And those were the parts of this movie that I was like, ooh, I don't like that. In general, what were your feelings about The Sweet East without getting any real specifics?
Oh boy. It just, the more I think about it, it's almost as if they're kind of like, she has more control about the situation than, than the story lets on. She's allowing this to happen, kind of thing. Like as much as like Talia Ryder, she was amazing in it. She has an amazing amazing performance, amazing presence. Lillian as a character is kind of unlikable.
Yeah.
And it's fine to have an unlikable character. It's just like I don't think she grew.
No. I would say I agree. I think Talia Ryder has fantastic screen presence. She has a face that kind of draws you in. She has kind of large eyes. There's something just about her that you're like, oh yeah, that's like a movie star.
Yeah.
Almost maybe like an old silent film kind of look to her a little
Yeah, like
bit.
she's the type of person that will like sneakily come in and become something a little bit bigger over time.
And we'd seen her previously, and I think I'm getting the title correct, which is Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always.
Wasn't she like the main character or like the
She was
friend?
not the main character.
She
She
was
was the cousin who worked at the grocery store
okay, yeah.
and goes with her cousin to the city to get an abortion.
Mm-hmm.
And she had a lot more screen presence, I think, in that movie than the lead.
Yeah.
The lead had a more muted role. But I think Talia Ryder, there is a sort of like mischievous quality to her. Like she's someone who's going to get up to trouble.
Yeah.
And so this film works for her. Uh, I would agree on the other points where it does. There's a quote I found from her in an interview about this film where she said, um, part of growing up for a woman is realizing that most men around you want something from you, and it's also okay to want something from them. And that quote did not sit well with me because it's reflective not of a truth of the human condition, but a truth of life under capitalism, in that relationships now in the States, from what I can tell, from what I see young people when they talk about dating apps and just trying to find a partner, particularly if you're trying to find a partner of the opposite sex, everything has become so transactional.
Yeah.
And that is so rooted in the consumptive nature of capitalism, right? That relationships don't exist for me to help boost another person or we mutually boost each other. It's I get something and I have to give them something in return to get that something.
Yeah, and I think the reason that it also probably doesn't touch well on it is this idea that your morals and ideas go out the window because, hey, I, you know, I want a typical, I want a certain type of number in my bank account. I want certain type of exposure.
I want to live a certain economic lifestyle.
So like
Yeah.
it's okay if you oogle or to like look at me or like sexualize me as long as the exchange is what I want.
Well, it goes back to kind of one of the conversations I've started to hear about sex work in the States, where it is a very complicated thing because sex work should be legal. I mean, you sell your body for any job that you do.
Yeah.
It involves labor and your body has to do the labor. Um, but there is something about what's going on in the States where all intimacy is becoming subsumed by the capitalist consumption
Yeah.
idea, so that there are, I mean, I guarantee there are lots of young women on things like OnlyFans who are not doing it because sex work is a passion for them. They feel like they're creating art. They're doing it because they want money and they see this as a way to make money that they can just do.
Yeah.
And they don't have to have a boss, which there's nothing wrong with not when you have a boss either. But it's also, we shouldn't be creating a society in which women feel compelled to self-exploit in order to pay their bills. Like that should not be.
Yeah.
And it's becoming, I feel like, a more and more prevalent aspect of this sort of COVID era America.
Well, yeah, especially because there's so many like news outlets that had like clickable articles that were like fourth grade teacher was caught having an OnlyFans and talks about how like the OnlyFans saved her from having to foreclose her house.
You know,
Like so and so, like one of the actors from like Soprano, like she talked about like how
oh, Drea De Matteo. Well, she's also an anti-vaxxer,
it's an
so fuck her. Yeah, that's why
anti-vaccine,
she has to go on Only. That's the thing is,
but
if you
it's
have to go on OnlyFans because you won't get vaccinated and you work in the film industry, then fuck you.
but it's also like
But
how
it's the common working person
yeah,
that I'm
but you
worried
think
about.
about
Yeah,
the extremes on how they always say that they're going to touch eventually. The people who don't like were just sort of like for valid reasons going, I have to go to sex work because I am autoimmune for whatever reason, or I live with an autoimmune person, or I don't want to get fucking sick, or I don't get the
yeah.
benefits, or my hours are getting cut. I'm gonna do like OnlyFans or sex work in order to make ends meet. She didn't want to get vaccinated, so she got fired from a show, and in order to end like
Pay her bills.
pay her bills, she went to sex work. And it's like these extremes that nobody wants to actually be like, hey, we're going on we're suffering kind of the similar things, they'll just be like, oh, but that person is beneath me. And it's just people are losing also like common sense and common ground
Well,
with
and
each other.
you see it with even the conversations about what's going on in Gaza is the American mindset, and it's not everyone, but it's still a larger portion of the population than it should be, is completely narcissistic and does not care about anyone's comforts or livelihood other than their own. And this is something that has been cultivated in the States. And I think the Sweet East kind of shows that in a way that I don't know if it's fully aware of. There is a lot of conspiracy theory in the film, and it's clear that it's trying to poke fun at the conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
But it's also trying to do this sort of South Park detached irony bullshit, which I am so over at this point.
Yeah.
For example, one of the inciting incidents in the film, and there's like, it's a film with a ton of scenes that I really liked and I thought were good. One of my favorite scenes in the movie is the opening credits. Uh, Lillian, Talia Ryder's character, is in the bathroom at a bar where she has ended up, and she starts singing a song, and there's like music backing, and the credits play. And when the credits are over, she's not singing anymore, and she doesn't sing ever again in the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
And I loved that little like strange touch.
Yeah, like I like the fact that when she's looking in the mirror, it looks like she's looking directly into the camera.
There's a lot of her awareness of being in a movie at a certain point.
Yes.
Yeah. And like the lyrics of the song are almost kind of talking about things that are going to happen. Like one of the lyrics I remember, she says, "This is about they promised me a mirror. They promised I'd be a star on the screen."
Mhm.
And later in the film, she becomes like the star of this independent film made by this duo of directors. So I love that. The bar they're in happens to be the site where a crazed conspiracy theorist played by Andy Milonakis shows up with a gun, claiming that they have like a pedophile dungeon there. So it's clearly a reference to the Pizzagate shit that happened. But then they do this thing where there's a freegan, this sort of punk freegan that she's met at the bar, and he comes to hide with her in the bathroom while they're waiting for the police to show up or whatever's going to happen. And he shows her a hidden door and runs through it to help her escape. And he makes the comment, "Seemed so much bigger when I was a kid." So the implication is that they did have a pedophile dungeon in this place, and that's never really commented on. So that's meant to be like a punchline to a joke, but it kind of feels like a poorly thought out edgelord kind of joke where you're like, okay, but what was the joke though? That the conspiracy guy was right? Like, and that's where it's a film that's both trying to be political and anti-political at the same point, and it can't
Yeah.
ever reconcile those two things to be coherent.
Yeah, it reminds me, I forgot her name. She became like a huge Christian. She became like a meme. She got interviewed by like Shapiro like people. I think
This woman's name is in my notes. So do you already want to go
yeah.
there?
Yeah, go there.
So uh this the dubious politics of this movie. It reminds us of this era of detached irony, where you really have to examine this film to determine if it's pushing something revolutionary or reinforcing the same mindset as someone like a Gavin McInnes, right?
Yeah.
And it feels like it's right on that McInnes territory. And so I discovered this term that I never heard of, Dimes Square. And it's a reference to a certain area in Brooklyn that became a hotbed. They said, particularly in the early years of the pandemics, and I think even just before then it was about to set off, of a lot of hipster reactionary movements. And one of the things they mentioned was Dasha Nekrasova and the Red Scare podcast. For those unfamiliar, Dasha became famous of an interview that Alex Jones people
Yes.
did at some event. She's kind of wearing like a sailor girl outfit. She has an iced coffee, and she's asked something about public health care. And the Alex Jones correspondent, of course, is going off on this tangent about Venezuelan people eating rats to survive. And Dasha goes, "I don't know what you're talking about. I just want free health care." And so she became this kind of like, oh, this sort of like commie hipster. And she kind of parlayed that into some other things, including the Red Scare podcast. she parlayed it into a 1-season supporting role on Succession,
Yeah, and to
and then they just
escape.
wrote her out. And then the pandemic led her to become part of this kind of like regressive hipster Catholic revival.
Yeah, a lot like it's weird because a lot of them are like, I'm doing it for the aesthetics.
Yeah, and it's this sort of, it feels like the ultimate late stage capitalism like mindset of you're so detached that even the things you say you believe in you do ironically, so ultimately nobody can, and it's done in almost this way to avoid being pinned down as anything.
Yeah.
But I don't care if someone pins me down as a communist because I support most of the communist ideas, and I'm willing to debate uh falsehoods and propaganda that have been spread about communism.
Is she still a communist?
I don't even know she was a communist to begin with. That's the thing.
Okay.
With the Dime Square crowd, there's a lot of saying something to provoke a reaction,
Okay.
and that's about it. It's very surface level, like I said before, edgelord crap. And this film kind of vibrates with that a little bit. In
Yeah.
particular, the Dime Square movement tried to repopularize the use of the word retarded as a pejorative term. And in this movie,
It is
Lillian drops the R word like 3 or 4 times. At one
Yeah.
point, one character kind of like softly calls her out about it, but it never really goes anywhere.
They just say you're in love with that word.
Yeah. And that kind of that was like a little red flag for me when it kept coming up. Like I kept
Yes.
thinking like, why are we saying this? Because it doesn't feel like we're saying it in a way that we're commenting on the kinds of people who say it. It feels like we're saying it to say it, or saying it and going, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's a really weird element of this film, and it kind of, it's like you were saying, the more I've thought about the film, the more it hasn't sat well with me as a whole. But then that also kind of disturbs me because of some of the actors who are present in this movie.
Yeah.
Particularly, we have Jacob Elordi and Io Edebiri, and that's why I keep thinking like, am I misreading the film, or is the film made badly so that you end up misreading it? Well, and then Simon Rex as well. Let's talk about his character.
Okay.
Simon Rex, who, if you hadn't heard about him until recently, you probably heard about him from oh, what was that Sean
Red
Baker
Rocket,
Red
yeah.
Rocket? Yeah. He plays a college professor who is secretly a white supremacist in the film, and
Mhm.
develops a kind of Lolita-esque relationship with Lillian, where he houses her, and it's clear that he desires her, but he's holding himself back. And then there's moments where like she throws herself at him, but I was reading that as, oh, did she know he wouldn't go for it? And that was the point where she would drive him away so then she could escape. But again, it's hard. Lillian's a hard character to read.
It's also like this weird thing of like, at no to escape, it would be a bizarre thing because she isn't really entrapped by him. He doesn't at any point is like, no, you have to come with me. He's like, hey, do you want a place to stay? And she doesn't want to go home. So she just goes with him and never is like, you're a bad person for the beliefs that you have.
Yeah, him being a white supremacist is never directly addressed by the film as being a bad thing. It's just kind
No.
of a character trait.
It's like a zany little thing because it's like, oh, he's a professor. And then he's like, oh, the higher educations would not think it'd be great with my certain beliefs, but I'm still here.
And then also this weird fantasia of him not making any sort of aggressive sexual move towards her, which I'm like, yeah, I guess in real life that's happens, but I would say that's not the majority of the instances that
Yeah, there
happen.
would be at the least like a verbal manipulation of being like, I've housed you, I fed you, I paid for your food. You owe me something.
Yeah, and that character is so crucial to the plot, and I never even feel like by the end of the movie that it says, and he's a bad person. At the end of the movie, I almost feel we're supposed to be sympathetic to him because he's been beaten up by these organized crime guys, and Lillian has gotten him in trouble. And I'm like, you're not wanting me to feel sympathy for this guy, right? And it's, once again, the movie's so hard to read and it's not because it's so cleverly written, it's because it's constantly dodging and weaving, wanting to provoke and then step back and go, why are you so upset? What are you upset
And
about? It's a
it
very,
makes, like, this weird
it's a
thing.
troll movie.
It is kind of, I think it also, they have two black characters with large afros
Yeah.
that for whatever reason are almost put there immediately when you're supposed to go like, and this is the moment that Lillian understands that she did a bad thing. Instead, she is, you know, she's basically like loved bombed by them, being like, you're the perfect face. This is the. So it's just, and her going like, oh yeah, no, that's great. Like her just being convinced to do it, even though there's slight hesitation. There also is like this weird, like, I don't know if you picked it up, like sexual tension between
Her and Io Edebiri's character?
character
Yes.
and
Which never really goes anywhere.
doesn't go anywhere. Like, mind you, Io Edeberry is like, is she still great in this role?
Yeah.
She sells it very well. It's just, it makes you wonder, like, what was it when you read the script and you talked to everybody, and then when you saw the final like product, what were your feelings on it? Because you could have been sold something completely
Well, she
different.
posted a review on Letterboxd. She didn't give it any stars, but she went, I'm contractually obligated to say I love this or something. But it didn't feel like she was being ironic either.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's a lot of things about this movie that are very strange to me. There's shocking bursts of violence in the middle section, which is like
Yeah.
graphic, bloody gore. Which once again made me think, is this film just a big trolling provocation? It's clearly also referencing things like Alice in Wonderland,
Yeah.
where like then
Well,
the
she's following the guy like from the pizza place.
he's like, oh, the White Rabbit.
He's the White Rabbit
And
because
then
his hair is almost white.
the two directors, Molly and Matthew, are very much supposed to be like Tweedledum, Tweedledee.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if every character lines up. I think the director said he didn't really even think about the Alice in Wonderland thing until later, and I'm like, that's bullshit. It's also a great example of a picaresque, which is a genre of story where a character just kind of goes around from one location to the next and has misadventures, which is Alice in Wonderland, but also the novel Tom Jones. It's kind of reinforced in this movie with the title cards.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like, we're in this chapter now. We're in this chapter now. Overall, would you recommend The Sweet East?
No.
Yeah.
There's nothing like particularly interesting about it. It just ends up, pretty white girl ends up okay at the end of the film.
I think Talia Ryder is a great lead actress.
Yeah.
But I think this movie is so incoherent that it just doesn't ultimately make much sense. A young man gets recruited into a secret society of magical black people who dedicate their lives to making white people's lives easier. Although initially enamored with his new powers, he begins to question the value of using supernatural means to do the very thing he's felt obligated to do his whole life. This is the American Society of Magical Negroes, the directorial debut of Kobe Leby. So I looked up Kobe because I want to know, who is this guy? Where did he come from? He was one of the talking heads on the short-lived Jordan Klepper Comedy Central news comedy program. It was their attempt to replace Colbert.
Yeah.
And he was that white guy, and it would always be very condescending to like conservatives.
Wait, it's a white dude that
No.
Okay,
Jordan Klepper is.
Okay.
And so Kobe Libby was one of those like reporters on the scene kind of people.
Okay.
And he's acted in a lot of things, like in small roles. I'm guessing he's done a lot of writing. He probably wrote for that show. And so this is his writer directorial debut. What were your initial thoughts about the American Society of Magical Negroes?
This is a terrible movie. And we're not talking about so terrible it's good, a la Madam Web, from what people keep saying. This was just bad.
Yeah, it's a film that when you get to the end of it and you're trying to sort through what was the message of this movie, feels like the worst message you could possibly do in a movie like this.
It was like the dollar store version of Sorry to Bother You.
Yeah, I remember I made that comment to you while we were watching. I said, this feels like neoliberal Boots Riley.
Yeah, like they did, like again, like you said at the beginning of the podcast, it was they wanted to make a commentary on something, but they didn't really want to make a commentary
They
on
wanted to make a
something.
commentary, but they didn't want to be held accountable for anything they might say.
And I think
So they ended up saying nothing.
and it's also like this weird thing because I saw a lot of people just being like, so you give him magic to help a white dude out while he's falling in love with a white woman, which I'm really unsure if she's
I
white
think
or
she's
not.
like maybe part Chinese,
Yeah, and
Korean,
it is
maybe. Because they do make some mention of her being non-white, but they never explain like what they're talking about.
it is and it felt that every it, I feel like every actor was pitched another movie and that's why they were playing it in a certain way. It just was it was all over the place. It was messy. It felt like they just skipped a few things and were just kind of like in their heads being like, you know what? It's going to be a lot of white people watching this, and every white person loves Harry Potter. So
Well,
we really don't have to explain this.
it felt like a movie that was written for a white audience, not a black audience at
No,
all.
it was, and it's also like this weird thing that they do mention in the film that like Justice Smith's character, Aaron, he is biracial. And at no point, like he's like, oh yeah, my mom's white.
Well,
So
I'm
like,
gonna stop you there
mhm.
because this isn't even a comment you can make about Aaron. Can you name any character in this movie that actually is developed into a fully dimensional, authentic feeling human being?
No one is.
Not a single character is.
No.
So I would say the film to me felt like a feature-length SNL skit that hadn't been finished in the writer's room before they started filming.
Yeah, like
They had an idea of what if there was this thing, and they're like, "Oh yeah, just turn the cameras on, start shooting."
yeah,
And you're like, "But we don't have that thing developed. That
it felt like
idea."
every time I was watching it, it just felt like a selection of little skits that you would have made on SNL or another comedy show that you sewed up together very quickly to try to be like, and this is a movie. And
Well, you talk about that. There's a movie like that that exists. It's good.
what?
Hollywood Shuffle with Robert Townsend, which is a series of sketches that are making fun of what it's like to be an actor in Hollywood when it's dominated by white people.
Yeah, it's just
And that had a point, and it wasn't afraid to mock white people. This film, the premise is that white people are so infantilized that only very patient black people can keep them from becoming violent. And there's a way to take that premise and then flip it on its head by the end of the movie and turn it into a thing of, hey, you know what? White fragility is not the responsibility of any black person. That's white people's responsibility. But the film is too afraid to even make that point.
it really is, and it's really scared to make any of the people, any of the white people that they represent
Threatening.
being their clients, like I said, threatening or assholes
Well,
or
there's the
just
one scene that, because we'll talk about the insane tonal shifts in this movie. This movie doesn't know if it wants to be a cartoonish satire or if it wants to be a rom-com or if it wants to be this serious social movie. It jumps all over the place. And there's that scene where they're going into the club, and it's that intensely atmospheric scene with the dudes he encountered before and the dude's girlfriend, where you're just like, what? And it's like that's the only time a white person feels threatening. The rest of the movie, because in that scene, it's Tim Baltz, who is BJ on The Righteous Gemstones, plays a police officer who they talk down. And once, I mean, this movie, I want to go in so many directions in talking about it. Let's talk about the scene where they meet him as a perfect example of the contrivance of this film. Every situation in this film does not happen in a way that feels organic at all.
no.
It is so contrived that these people would be pushed into these situations, and you're just like, huh? Why would you say that? And then somehow saying that thing fixes the problem. And it's just so that that scene would end and they could go on to another scene. With the instance of Officer Miller, at one point, David Alan Grier's character mentioned something about, oh, how they could get him into a club.
Yeah, because it's
And-
supposed to be like showing on how like he's still cool.
But here's the thing. Why would this cop want to get in a club? Like it comes from this weird, it comes from a weird like presumption. There's like a bunch of things the movie isn't saying, but assumes it's true.
Yep.
That is this, of course, this guy wants to get into a cool black club. All right, I am someone who I have no problem with black people. I love black people, right? They're great, right? Some of them are assholes. Some of them are great. They're human beings.
Yeah.
I don't care about going to a white club, a black club. I hate clubs. But it's the way they have this scene. It's like, yeah, of course Officer Miller would want that. And I'm just, is this LA brain? Because the film is very clearly shot in LA.
Yeah.
And I'm like, is this the way people in Los Angeles think people's brains work? Because it felt so, and like David Alan Grier is what, in his 60s? Tim Baltz he's around my age.
Yeah.
What are these? Do people this age go to clubs regularly? Like, it just felt so alien and weird.
Weird because it's supposed to be that he's talking about how he feels like he's lost his mojo, but it's also this thing of it being like,
why are they having this conversation?
oh, it's supposed to be like he's a police officer. We need to make sure that he's cooled down because he might shoot a black person.
But how do they get to that conversation? Because there's a cut, and then all of a sudden he's just sitting on the hood of his car, and that's what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And you're like, how did we get here, though? Like, there's ways to do a jump cut and make that jump cut a punchline and a joke, but this isn't funny. And so often things like that happen throughout this movie where you can tell the movie is telling you this is a comedy moment. This is a punchline. This is meant to be silly. And there is not a single thing funny about it at all.
If you had told me that the production company, including the writers, the directors,
Have been white?
all this, no, not have been white.
I'd go, yeah, it seems
had
like they are.
all graduated from doing Nickelodeon sitcoms.
Yeah.
I would have fucking believed you.
Yeah. Wizards of Waverly Place is what we're watching.
Like,
Yeah.
You're referencing Disney there, honey.
But I felt it was appropriate because it was
Yeah.
magical Negroes.
And like, the thing is, like, the lighting is terrible.
Yes.
The lighting is terrible.
Every aspect of production design is bad.
And it is this horrendous thing that like we've talked about in the past on how like certain black directors go like, I'm going to make my black characters look fucking amazing in this lighting, and I don't give a shit if the white people look pale or
I know
tan.
Barry Jenkins has done a great
Yeah.
job of that. Yeah.
I'm also thinking about like that Signalese director that we watched.
Usman Sembin.
Yes,
Yeah.
something when the white people come in, they just looked atrocious.
Oh yeah.
And there was none of that in this. It was just
Ugly, like washed out. It was overly lit or underlit, like constantly.
It was like the movie was not well explained. It was just supposed to be, oh, Aaron is a weird hipster artist that isn't making it through and needs to make money.
But okay, he's an artist. He makes yarn sculptures.
Yes.
Which plays absolutely no role in the movie until near the end when they need it to play a role in the movie. And that's why this whole thing is constructed. They will introduce a thing like the titular American Society of Magical Negroes. They set it up, just baseline set it up, just like surface level. And then it just doesn't play a role. Then all of a sudden we're in a romantic comedy, in a workplace romantic comedy.
Yeah.
And then in the like near the end of the second act, they bring the American Society back, and it actually plays any sort of role because they need there to be conflict. They need there to be drama. It's a film like it seems to be poking fun at the regressive politics of the center at the beginning. With white fragility as black responsibility, but then it meanders and it goes off the rails to where by the end, I think it might actually be saying that that's a good thing. There's a quote that David Alan Grier's character gives where he says, the American Society of Magical Negroes has done more to stop white people from becoming violent than 100 protests. And when the society is clearly a metaphor for sort of moderate, liberal, pro-capitalist black people, like your Jim Clyburns of the world, your Stacey Abrams of the world, who are very much capitulating to the status quo and the establishment and the system as is.
Their paddle, like,
Where they're like, no, 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 we can get it and we can reform it just enough that it allows us inside.
yeah.
And then pull the ladder up behind us. That's the vibe of this. And the movie ends with not a condemnation of this system, but a, well, we'll be there when we're needed kind of a thing, which is disturbing.
Yeah, it's sort of like, hey, Aaron did the right thing, but we're still gonna be around because you need us.
Well, because yeah, Aaron did the right thing. Let's talk about what he did. So Aaron is a painfully thin character, and he's the protagonist, and there's no one else in the movie that gets developed more than him, and he barely gets developed.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Because it's supposed to be like that you cannot use your magic for selfish reasons. And if you use your magic for selfish reasons, then the collective magic goes down.
But there's no real exploration of any of this.
No, it's just said. Again, it is for white people who really love fucking Harry Potter.
Well, it's a very liberal reading of racism, of just racism is when white people get cranky. That's what the movie is saying, other than the actual role in Western society of racism, which is a wedge that is used to keep people from moving past capitalism, right? There's only so many jobs, there's only so many houses. You better make sure you hold on to them, white people, lest the black people take them, right? Like that's the role of racism in the West. And so the film, by going like, oh no, racism is when white people get a little upset, right? I think it's an incredibly dangerous message to send, right?
It's just not. It was not good.
And then it's black people's responsibility to do anything about it. But I want to talk about the moment where Aaron, quote unquote, does the right thing. So he finally stands up to his coworker Jason, played by Drew Tarver, and he does this. The standing up to him is done by delivering a wonderfully worded speech about being black. And that just fixes everything, right? Where have we seen this done recently?
Where?
Barbie. It's like the black version of the Barbie feminism speech, which all it does is just, it's like someone coming into a room and going, hey, war is bad and it kills lots of people. And you're like, yeah, why don't we go deeper to the root cause of the thing rather than just talking about how the thing is bad? Like, yes, misogyny is bad, racism are bad. Would you like to unpack them at all? And we could explore where they originate from and why they're perpetuated, right? Because why does it keep coming up? Isn't that weird that after so many generations and so many centuries, we're still dealing with the same issues with racism? Maybe they've changed a little bit as technology has changed, but ultimately it's the same thing, right? This movie has no interest in doing that. It's just you got to make sure white people aren't cranky. That's how you save, like, you keep police from murdering people. How does this make you feel about the direction of the United States? Things like this being made. Thankfully, it seems like everybody's kind of saying it's bad. It's not like it's being praised.
I think it's also just the fact, I think the near ending of it even was kind of a slap in the face. Like they knew what they were doing. And you know what I'm talking about. Should we just spoil it towards the end of like when
Oh, so swag?
Yeah.
I still don't understand what the fuck I was supposed to get from that.
Like a secret society of supportive girlfriends and wives.
But I don't understand why that was there.
It was like
like that's the thing
indicate, like this will explain why it is that the love interest had no problems whatsoever and was willing to forgive Aaron because he left her in the middle of New York when they live in LA.
Because he was using his magic powers, which are not detailed or specified in any way.
To like have a romantic setting of a kiss. And then she has to fly back. And when he finally catches up to her, which, like, wouldn't that be like a 5-hour or 4-hour
That's a long flight. That's a long
So like between him having his moment with like the society about what he had done, And she's just like, oh no, it's okay. And they finally kiss.
But like I understand that that thing is in the movie, right? There's lots of things in this movie, but the problem with all the things in this movie is the movie never really communicates what it wants to say about those things. So you're like, "Oh, there is this thing that exists." So it's supposed to serve as part punchline. It's not funny. And it's also supposed to be a comment on something. And I don't really understand, like, is it a good thing this place exists? Is it a bad thing this place exists?
Like
Is it just like a shrug at the end of the movie?
it's like indicating, well, that was the role that she needed to play, and that was the thing that she needed to do, and that's okay because she's a part of her own secret society kind of thing. But she also never reveals to Aaron that she's in this society.
But I also don't understand the point of her being in it, though.
Yeah,
Like, what does that add to
it's
my
just
understanding of the
it was
film?
basically like an excuse as to why she was, such a chill girl.
Well, no, I think it was just a lazy punchline to end the movie
It was
on.
just not. It
Uh,
was.
but like, one of the things that really annoys me is the presence of so many sort of Earwolf podcast LA UCB comedy scene people in this movie.
Yeah.
Because we mentioned Tim Baltz, Drew Tarver, Nicole Byer, and Michaela Watkins. And then I think Jillian Vigman, who she did like Dinner at a Movie, and
Yeah.
she's kind of she's from more like an older Gen X-y, boomery kind of generation part of it. But the thing about these people is ever since the genocide in Gaza began, I really have felt very turned off by that comedy scene because they were so politically engaged and involved when the strikes were going on.
Mm-hmm.
And then the minute the strike stopped, they were like, why would you expect me to speak up for anything? Why would you expect me to speak up for anything? And these are the same people that would like post their little black squares during the Black Lives Matter protests of 2020, right? But when it comes to the Gaza issue, radio silence, right? And we all understand why.
Yeah, and
Is
there's
there
only like a handful of them
Yeah.
that are mentioning Free Gaza.
They're worried about their livelihoods. And so I can understand why someone might be worried about, their income. But at the same time, they don't seem to be worried about their humanity. So when they do something like this, a film that should be, if you think about a movie like this being made in the 70s, it would have been far more biting. That movie would have like you think about Watermelon Man,
I kept
that movie.
thinking about like this should have been a Richard Pryor film
Yeah.
where there would have been a lot more like reaction, cursing, argumenting back. And it's like this weird thing is like what kind of annoys me about it is that like David Allen Greer is so fucking charismatic
In a role that has nothing for him.
and in a role that just like that he doesn't blossom into anything. Instead, he's verbally telling us his personality.
Yeah, everything is exposition.
It's, so and so told me not to recruit you because I'm just a little stern. And you're like, okay. And then it's just sort of like, Aaron, don't worry. I know what it is to fall in love with someone that your client wants, and I gave her away.
Yeah, like they have that whole thing where he gets a backstory that is pure exposition.
And like
it means nothing other than for him to go, I understand, Aaron.
like it's not as if like he goes to, a home to go visit someone and the woman doesn't recognize him. But it turns out he's been making sure that she's okay throughout all these years as she talks about how lovingly about her husband, who he helped set her up with, that kind of shit. No. It's just a photograph that he keeps.
Yeah, she's not even really a character.
She's not a character.
She's a prop to give him a backstory to then have him relate to Aaron. That's
and
it.
then, like the thing is like Aaron and Lizzie do not have chemistry.
No one has chemistry in this movie.
So many scenes of them just bonding and hanging out.
The middle of the movie, the walk in the park scene. How did you feel about that scene?
It just there's so many scenes of them talking that is and there's nothing I'm gaining from it.
Were they improvising dialogue and they're just not funny? Because those scenes drag. Those scenes feel like an eternity. And it's meant to be like, oh, isn't this cute, awkward back and forth? It's boring, dull, monotonous back and forth.
And yeah, and it's also like this weird thing that like, so Jason, who's supposed to be Aaron's client, only later figures out that he has a thing for Lizzie. We don't really see him trying to hit on Lizzie. It's more him going like, "Hey, Aaron, what's that thing that you said to her that made her laugh last time? I'm going to say it this time." Or "I'm going to ask her out." Or, "Oh, she made so-and-so presentation, but I'm making the presentation to the big boss. Don't worry about it." And it's really weird because you think like there would be scenes of maybe Aaron trying to sabotage Jason, like small things.
There's like no conflict.
There's no conflict. There's this weird scene that they're both wearing VR headsets, and like Aaron is about to like almost get to the edge of a stairs and fall, but he doesn't, and no one reacts towards
But
it except to say, "Oh my God, he almost died there."
that's another like, you're supposed to laugh at this moment. And I'm going, well, I would laugh if it was funny.
Or if I cared, or
Yeah.
if there was
If
actual
Aaron fell and
tension.
died, I wouldn't care. I'd be like,
I-
finally, the movie's over.
Like I had no sense of like danger or tension when they would be like, "Well, if you use your powers for selfish reasons, like the powers go out," and it was someone else that gets kicked out. At no point were like there could have been like blackouts on their magic or like small
And there's a
things that,
pun right there,
yeah,
blackouts.
like being like small little things that he's doing, like maybe him making Jason spill coffee on himself, so he has to like walk away from Lizzie. There's also like during the VR set thing, it's supposed to be he's trying to be like, "Why don't you use Lizzie as your co-presenter? Because she was the one that made the whole thing." And their conversation is so distorted because it's supposed to be Jason doesn't get his privilege. He's just like, "I just worked hard." And then there's like the Ghana Gate thing with this whole fake social media thing.
It's supposed to be like Facebook and their facial recognition doesn't work on black faces.
Yeah,
But like
it's like
it doesn't
it
really.
doesn't work because then the Ghana people were like, "Well, it was the most productive I've ever been my whole life."
But
Like
it's
work
also
wise.
contrived because they need a moment for Aaron to have this big speech and it be something that a bunch of people hear. So they create this scandal in the movie to be able to have that moment.
Yeah.
I want to talk about back again, this movie is called The American Society of Magical Negroes, an element of the film that gets barely any development. One of the few times or like basically the only development we get is we constantly go back to the hidden headquarters and they're sitting around in chairs listening to one of the members exposit the history of the group. But the thing is, a character like David Alan Grier's Roger is sitting in the audience. Why is he there? And it's also when Aaron joins, it appears as though they're recruiting like a whole new class of black people.
Yeah.
But then when Aaron graduates, he's the sole graduate, and there's never a mention of any other rookies in the field or
No.
anything. And then these continued classes, you think, oh, maybe Aaron, because he's new, it's this sort of these courses he has to go through. But then why is Roger there other than, oh, we need a scene where Aaron is having a back and forth with Roger? How can we do that when we don't have anything developed about this society other than this one room that everything takes place
and then
in?
the lecture is supposed to exposit what your feelings are supposed to be because it's like black people are supposed to make yourself palatable to white people. Show who you are without showing who you are. They don't see the sadness behind your eyes. And
And that's why you're never sure if it's satirical or if it's like it's a shame we have to do this,
but
but it's like, well, you don't have to do it though.
let's talk about a specific scene that marks to you how this was a badly edited.
The iPad.
It was her laptop.
Okay, so yeah, it was Michaela Watkins who plays Masterson, who is the sort of supervisor manager of Aaron's group of workers.
Yeah.
And it's a scene where she's talking and we have like there's a mid shot and then there's a wide shot. And in the wide shot, she's clutching a laptop to her chest. And every time it cuts to the mid shot, both her arms are moving at the same time. And there's like 4 or 5 times that we cut back and forth. It's so glaringly bad.
So bad. It really shocked me.
In a Universal Pictures, big logo at the beginning of this movie.
Because it's like it's something that could have been prevented.
Well, it's something you're
but
supposed to spot in editing.
But they kept it, and it just showed me that whoever did the editing had no sense of comedic pacing. And the director just let it through.
Well, I can tell you who edited it. Brian Scott Olds is his name. Uh, we'll bring him up here on the old computer and see what else he's done. Oh, he edited the Happy Time Murders, which was Collateral, which we just recently watched. So very LA director. So the Happy Time Murders was that adult Muppet movie with Melissa McCarthy.
Yeah.
Collateral, two Michael Mann movies, Collateral and Miami Vice. So this is not a guy who he edited the Chippendale Rescue Rangers movie, which I did not enjoy very much. So yeah, this is a guy who
He's a working editor.
he was in the editorial department for those Michael Mann movies. As a lead editor, he's been a lead editor since about 2006. It looks like he edited 19 episodes of Prom Queen. I don't know what that is. But he should know better, or there's continuity people on set, right? Who are supposed to take account of what props and clothing people are wearing to make sure that when we do coverage, if we have to shoot on another day, we have all the same props and clothing. They must have given this movie like no budget. It's only made $2.5 million at the box office before they put it straight to like streaming.
How much did it cost to be made?
I'm sure more than $2.5 million. Like that's yeah. It is, and sometimes they won't release that budget information, so you're never really sure. But yeah, I don't know. All I know is that it made $2.5 million, which is going to be a lot lower than it probably should have made. Would you recommend the American Society of Magical Negroes?
Oh boy. No. It's like a big question mark at the end of it, just sort of like watch this and then watch something that Boots Riley.
I'm a Virgo.
Yeah. And
sorry to bother you.
Like realize that like not everybody can do that unless like it was like a frightened mouse.
It was shockingly horribly executed in every regard. And I would recommend it in the same way that I would recommend watching Tyler Perry's films for sociological purposes. It is important that you see what is being fed to the majority of the population as blackness.
Yeah.
Because you can see why things are so fucked up. Is that there's never a real reckoning or an exploration as to why anti-black racism is so prevalent in the States, because that would mean unpacking its relation to capitalism. And these production companies do not want to do that. Their whole thing is capitalism. So, well, how do they then pretend to be authentic about race? Well, we make these like half-assed movies that kind of address that racism exists, but never really talk about it in any meaningful way. And so that's why this movie has no teeth.
No.
And it's a movie that needed to have teeth. It needed to be vicious, and it refused because focus grouping told them, well, we want white people to enjoy the movie. So in a weird way, the movie itself is the magic of the American Society of Magical Negroes, making sure to not present white people as evil, but just cranky. They didn't have a snack. Their blood sugar's low. And
nobody hugged them today.
And that's why George Floyd was murdered. If Derek Chauvin had just had a Snickers, he wouldn't have been so cranky. But yeah, it's a movie that I'm glad I watched, because I think it's always good to keep your finger on the pulse of just how unhinged Hollywood becomes as it sinks into whatever fucking cesspool it's created for itself. But yeah, we previously mentioned like Barry Jenkins, a much better director, Usman Sembin, much better director. And if you want comedy about black people and talking about race, Boots Riley is a far better choice than whatever this crap is.
This was just terrible.
Well, that was the Pop Cult Podcast for this week. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure to check out our show notes for relevant links to things we might have mentioned, or just ways to keep in contact with us, including our website, popcult.blog. Make sure that you subscribe to be notified wherever it is you listen to podcasts so that you'll be notified when new episodes are up. If you happen to visit popcult.blog, you'll notice that we're finishing up April with our neo-noir series. And starting in May, we will be doing a series of films made by Ernst Lubitsch. He was a Hungarian filmmaker who got his big start or sort of breakout in Hollywood, making pre-code movies, which are very interesting to watch. You kind of learn about how Hollywood was willing to be a lot more risque and talk about sex more frankly before censorship came. So those have been some very interesting films to watch. If you enjoy what we do here on the podcast, if you enjoy what we do on popcult.blog, we would encourage you to support us over on Patreon. We've got 4 different reward levels to pick from, and we want to thank our current patrons, Becca and Matt, who donate at the writer's room level. At that level, they get to pick a movie every month. I watch it, review it. You're going to be seeing, you saw one of those last week, Betty Blue, and then we have another one coming up this week, which is Late Night with the Devil. If you subscribe to our Patreon at any level, you will get access to patron-exclusive podcasts, which are little mini-series we do, whether it's a tabletop role-playing, it's comparing our views on a film to Siskel and Ebert. We've got lots of those up there, and we have lots more coming in the near future. On our next episode of the Pop Cult podcast, we will be reviewing the Spanish-language film Totem and the Italian-language La Chimera, which I'm excited about that latter one especially. It's Alice Rohrwacher, who directed my favorite episode of My Brilliant Friend, and this will be the first time I've ever watched one of her films, so very interested to see that. Well, until next time, you keep listening, we'll keep watching.